At Thanksgiving, my billionaire brother, Sterling, smirked in front of the whole family. Is our little toy colonel still flying those big rig trucks? A government-subsidized hobby. My mother just stayed silent and gave a weak smile. But he didn't know that next week he would have to step into my playground, and he would have to learn the rules. I am Colonel Nellie Sharp, 38 years old, and my world is defined by the thunderous roar of 4 turbofan engines. Today, that roar is a furious scream as my C-17 Globemaster III battles a vicious crosswind slicing across the plains of Northern California. Below me, Travis Air Force Base looks like a precise grid of order and control, a world I am responsible for maintaining. Altitude holding steady, Colonel. Wind shear at 30 knots, a calm voice crackles in my headset. Copy that, I reply, my own voice steady, cutting through the noise. My hands covered in green Nomex gloves move with an instinct honed over thousands of flight hours. I nudge the yoke, a subtle correction that feels like a whisper to a 200-ton giant of steel and wire. On the ground, I can feel the eyes of my crew on the approaching aircraft. They aren't just watching a plane land, they're watching their commander. Their trust is a tangible weight, a responsibility I carry in the marrow of my bones. Here, my word is law, not because of ego, but because lives depend on it. With a final, decisive adjustment, I bring her down. The thud of the landing gear hitting the tarmac is a punctuation mark on a perfectly executed command. The giant groans, settles, and obeys. Stepping out of the cockpit and down onto the tarmac, the California sun warming my face, I am in my element. I am small in stature, but here, surrounded by the tangible power and discipline of the United States Air Force, I feel 10 feet tall, but that feeling evaporates the moment I step into my sterile, quiet office. The blinking light on my desktop signals a new email. My eyes scan the sender line, and a familiar cold dread seeps into my stomach, chilling me more than any high-altitude wind. The name reads Sterling Vance, my brother. The walls of my office, adorned with commendations and flight maps, suddenly feel like a fragile facade. The armor I wear every day, the uniform, the rank, the unwavering authority, cannot protect me from the wounds inflicted by my own family. And the name on the screen hurls me back in time, back to a wound that has never truly healed. The memory is sharp, rendered in the golden, buttery light of a Thanksgiving feast. The scene is my brother's opulent mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, a place so vast and silent it feels more like a museum than a home. The air is thick with the scent of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and the faint, sweet perfume of my mother's Chanel No. 5. A long mahogany table gleams under the light of a crystal chandelier, set with silverware so heavy it feels ceremonial. And there at the head of the table sits Sterling. He is the king in his castle, resplendent in a custom Tom Ford suit, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist as he raises a glass of amber liquid, Macallan 25, no doubt. His eyes, the same blue as mine but colder, land on me. I'm in civilian clothes, but it doesn't matter. To him, I am always in uniform. A smirk plays on his lips. A toast, he announces, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. He gestures his glass toward me. To our little toy colonel, still playing with her government-subsidized flying trucks? The words hang in the air, a deliberate strike. He continues, his voice booming. It's a wonderful hobby. We should all be so lucky to have the taxpayers fund our passions. His laughter echoes in the cavernous room, a sharp, cruel sound. A few of his business associates chuckle politely. I feel my face flush, a hot wave of shame and anger. My gaze darts to my mother, a silent plea for an ally. She offers none. She just sits there, a strained, placating smile on her face, her eyes refusing to meet mine. "Now, Sterling, don't tease your sister," she says, but her tone is weightless, an admiring indulgence of her brilliant son. It's a complete and utter surrender. A lump forms in my throat, hard and painful. In that moment, I am not a colonel in the United States Air Force. I am not a woman who commands a squadron and is responsible for hundreds of lives. At this table, surrounded by my own family, I am invisible. I am a decoration. A sharp knock on my office door shatters the memory, pulling me back to the present. I blink, the sterile white of my office walls, a stark contrast to the warm, suffocating gold of the memory. I stand up and walk to the window, my boots silent on the linoleum floor. Outside, the C-17s sit on the flight line, their gray fuselages stoic and powerful under the setting sun. They are my giants of steel, my silent partners. This is my world. A world of procedure, of physics, of consequences. A world where discipline is not a suggestion, but the very framework that keeps us all alive. It's a world Sterling's money can't buy, and his influence can't bend. A new feeling begins to crystallize inside me, cold and hard and clear. This time will be different. I will not swallow his poison and call it family duty. I will not let my mother's silent complicity render me powerless. He is coming here. He is stepping out of his world of tailored suits and abstract profits and into my sanctuary of flight suits and concrete reality. Here I write the rules. Here my authority is real. I think of my father, a decorated army colonel, the only one who ever truly understood. He saw the fire in me, not the gender. Sterling had turned his funeral into a networking event, reducing his life of service to a footnote in a business eulogy. A cold, quiet vow forms in my mind. Not here, Sterling. You will not do it here. You will not turn my father's legacy and my own into a punchline. Not in my house. My father's memory, the one I had clung to in my office, was a double-edged sword. It was my anchor, but it was also the key that unlocked a library of pain. The joke at the Thanksgiving table wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the latest entry in a long and meticulously kept ledger of disrespect. My brother, Sterling, had been mapping my insignificance for years, and each entry was a fresh layer of scar tissue over my heart. My mind drifts to a Christmas from a few years back. The air in the Connecticut mansion thick not with holiday cheer, but with a suffocating tension. Sterling was on a roll that night. He'd compared my C-17 to an Amazon delivery truck, only with a much worse fuel economy, and mused loudly about whether my pension would be enough to afford a membership at his golf club. I'd built up a tolerance to his verbal jabs over the years, a sort of emotional callus, but the final, sharpest insult that night didn't come from him. It came from his daughter, my niece, Tori. She was 16, a child of immense privilege, who looked at my life of service as if it were a baffling, primitive ritual. As I sat quietly on the velvet sofa, trying to make myself as small as possible, I saw the telltale glow of her smartphone. She was stifling a giggle, her thumbs flying across the screen. Then she angled the phone towards me. On the screen was a distorted, cartoonish version of my face, created by some ridiculous TikTok filter. My serious expression was twisted into a goofy grin, my head bobbing ridiculously as a cheap, synthesized military march played. Across the video, in bold pink letters, was the caption, "My aunt playing war while my dad runs the actual world." Sterling roared with laughter, a booming, triumphant sound that filled the entire room. It was a sound of validation, of victory. "That's my girl," he crowed. I looked at my mother, my last line of defense. She just shook her head, a faint, tired smile on her face. "Oh, Tori," she murmured, the words carrying no weight, no reprimand. It was the sound of surrender. I had to excuse myself, stepping out into the frigid air of the manicured garden, the biting cold, a welcome distraction from the fire of humiliation burning in my chest. I gasped for air, each breath a cloud of white in the freezing dark, trying to stop the tears from forming. But even that memory pales in comparison to the one that truly broke me, the one that I keep locked away in the deepest vault of my mind. Arlington National Cemetery, a cold, gray November day. The endless silent rows of white headstones stood at perfect attention, a silent army guarding the nation's soul. I stood ramrod straight, the crisp fabric of my Air Force dress uniform, a poor armor against the grief that was tearing me apart. We were burying my father. We were burying a hero. Sterling, of course, was delivering the eulogy. He stood at the lectern, not as a grieving son, but as a CEO, giving a quarterly report. He spoke of Dad's tenacity and drive, but he framed it all in the language of corporate success. Then came the line that shattered the sacred silence. "My father understood results, not process," Sterling said, his eyes finding mine in the small crowd. "He knew that the only real legacy is the bottom line you leave on the balance sheet of life." I felt the blood drain from my face. He was turning our father, a man who had bled for his country, into a business case study. He was desecrating his memory on holy ground. The ceremony concluded. The rifle volleys echoed and faded. An honor guard from the army, my father's branch, meticulously folded the American flag. The sergeant, his face a mask of solemn duty, presented the tightly folded triangle of stars and stripes to me. It was the nation's final thank you, a sacred trust passed into my hands. As I accepted it, my hands trembling, I glanced at Sterling. He wasn't looking at the flag. He was looking at me, and on his face was the faintest, most contemptuous smirk. He had stolen it. He had stolen my final sacred moment with my father, and reduced his life of honor to a number. That night, back at the house, I tried to break through the wall of denial. The air was heavy with the funereal scent of lilies. My mother was mechanically rearranging the sympathy bouquets, her back to me. "Mom," I started, my voice strained. "Did you hear what he said? At the funeral, he insulted Dad?" She didn't turn around. Her hands kept fussing with a white ribbon. "Nellie, please," she sighed. "Sterling is just practical. He has the entire family business on his shoulders now. You shouldn't be so sensitive. Don't be so sensitive." The words were a final, clean stab to the heart. They didn't just excuse Sterling's monstrous behavior, they invalidated my grief. They told me that my pain was the problem, that my love for my father, my reverence for his life of service, was a flaw. I wonder how many of you listening have had your entire world, your deepest grief, dismissed with those exact same words. I stood there in the silent, flower-filled room and finally understood. The book a friend had given me, Brené Brown's Daring Greatly, sat unread on my nightstand back in California. I wasn't ready to be vulnerable. I was too busy surviving. In this family, in this war for my own worth, I was utterly and completely alone. And my father, the one person who saw me, was gone. I was the sole guardian of his legacy now, a legacy my own family was determined to erase. Being the sole guardian of my father's legacy meant walking a lonely road. It was a path paved not with the cobblestones of wealth my brother so admired, but with the sharp, uneven gravel of responsibility. Sterling saw my career as a hobby, a state-funded adventure. He had no concept of the weight I carried, a weight that had felt heaviest back in 2005, under the gray, debris-filled skies of New Orleans. The memory comes back, not in a flash, but as a slow, creeping exhaustion. It's the phantom ache in my bones from flying 18-hour days, my body humming with the ceaseless vibration of the C-17's engines. The sky over Louisiana wasn't the brilliant blue of California. It was a bruised, sickly gray, a permanent twilight over a city drowning in its own sorrow. My aircraft wasn't carrying cargo pallets or Humvees, it was carrying people. Desperate, soaking wet people with the same hollow 1,000-yard stare in their eyes. The cargo bay, normally smelling of jet fuel and metal, was thick with the scent of damp clothes, stagnant water, and a primal suffocating fear. We landed on makeshift runways, cleared just enough for a giant like the Globemaster to touch down and take off again. There were no leisurely pre-flight checks, no coffee in the break room. It was a frantic race against time, against infection, against despair. Each takeoff was a victory, a small pocket of humanity lifted out of hell. This wasn't Sterling's idea of a war game. This was a war against chaos, and every single second mattered. This was the burden of service, a concept as foreign to my brother as humility. One night, the burden became almost too much to bear. On a late flight out of Louis Armstrong Airport, a quiet darkness had fallen over the cargo bay. We were flying a medical evacuation, the cabin filled with stretchers. Among them was an elderly woman, her face a roadmap of a long, hard life. We had done everything by the book, the medics working tirelessly, but she was too frail. She slipped away quietly, mid-flight, a silent surrender to exhaustion and heartbreak. I felt it the moment she was gone. The air in the plane seemed to change, to grow heavier. A life had been extinguished under my command, on my watch. The weight of that single, quiet death pressed down on me, heavier than my entire aircraft. Later that night, huddled in a temporary tent on some forgotten patch of concrete, the whine of generators a constant companion, I tried to bridge the chasm between my world and Sterling's. I opened my laptop and started writing him an email. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a desperate attempt to explain. I wrote about the look in that old woman's eyes before they closed for the last time. I wrote about the crushing helplessness of holding a life in your hands and feeling it slip through your fingers. I tried to describe the profound, terrifying silence in a cabin full of people after one of them is gone forever. I wrote and wrote, pouring out the anguish and the exhaustion. Then I stopped. My finger hovered over the send button. What was the point? How could a man who measures life in stock prices and quarterly earnings possibly understand a loss that had no monetary value? How could he comprehend a currency of sacrifice and duty? I deleted the entire draft, every last painful word. Just before closing my laptop, I checked my inbox. There was one new message. It was from him. It was a short, triumphant note, boasting about a lucrative logistics contract Vance Global had just secured, capitalizing on the very chaos that was swallowing the Gulf Coast. He saw a disaster, and his first thought was of profit. I saw a disaster, and my only thought was of the people. We weren't just different, we were from different species. Back in my office at Travis, the memory of Katrina clarifies something. Sterling scoffs at my world of rules and regulations. He sees them as bureaucratic nonsense, obstacles to be bent or broken. But in the utter chaos of New Orleans, those very rules were the only thing that kept me sane. The checklists, the procedures, the chain of command. They weren't a cage, they were a steel framework. They were the skeleton that held our world together when everything else was falling apart. They were the difference between a rescue mission and a panicked mob. Sterling saw rules as a weakness. I knew they were the source of my strength. In that moment of clarity, a new resolve settles over me. I think of a quote from General Norman Schwarzkopf I'd heard once, about how true leadership is a profound responsibility. I sit down at my desk, my back straight, my exhaustion replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I pull up the Department of Defense regulations on my computer, specifically the directives concerning civilian VIP transport on military aircraft. My eyes scan the dense text, line by line, paragraph by paragraph. I read about security protocols, background checks, and conduct requirements. I absorb every word, every subsection. A plan begins to form, not out of anger, but out of a deep, resonant understanding of my own power. Sterling thought my world was a game. Fine. If he wanted to play on my field, he was about to learn that my game has rules. And there are no exceptions. The weight of my decision to enforce military regulations on my own brother settled heavily in my gut. This wasn't just about winning an argument, it was about defending my world. And in my world, a commander is nothing without her team. The next morning, I called an unscheduled meeting. The two people who walked into my office were the bedrock of my command. Chief Master Sergeant Marcus Rico Alvarez was a seasoned Mexican-American airman whose calm demeanor masked a fierce loyalty. He'd been in the Air Force longer than I'd been alive and had seen it all. Beside him was Staff Sergeant Evelyn Evie Chen, a brilliant and sharp-witted flight engineer of Asian descent. Young enough to be my daughter, but with an old soul's wisdom. They were my right and left hands. I kept my briefing short and devoid of emotion. I didn't tell them about the years of mockery or the desecrated eulogy. I didn't need to. I simply stated the facts. We have a civilian VIP arriving for a familiarization flight, I said, my voice crisp and professional. His name is Sterling Vance. He is a prominent logistics CEO. I paused, letting the name hang in the air for a moment. I expect this to be executed with 100% adherence to protocol. No shortcuts, no special treatment. Every I dotted, every T crossed. Is that clear? Rico, who had served under me for 5 years, watched me with knowing eyes. He could read the tension in my posture, hear the steel in my voice, that wasn't usually there for a routine briefing. He saw past the rank and the jargon and saw the woman. "Crystal clear, Colonel," he replied, his voice a low, steady rumble. "We'll make sure no one disrespects our house." He emphasized the word house, just enough for me to know he understood. This base, this squadron, it wasn't just a workplace, it was our home, it was our sanctuary. After the meeting, as Rico left, Evie hesitated at the door. "Colonel?" she asked, her expression serious. "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted, Sergeant." She took a small step back into the room. "Ma'am, I did a little reading on Vance Global last night. Their entire corporate culture is built around ROI, return on investment. They measure everything." She took a breath, her gaze direct and unwavering. "I just wanted to say, our ROI is measured in refugees brought to safety. It's measured in soldiers returned home to their families. And you can't ever let anyone tell you that metric can be calculated in dollars and cents. Her words hit me like a cool drink of water in a desert. For the first time, someone had articulated the chasm between my world and Sterling's with perfect, stunning clarity. Someone understood. A genuine smile, the first one in days, broke through my carefully constructed facade. I saw not just a subordinate, but a kindred spirit. "Thank you, Evie," I said, and the words felt wholly inadequate. "That means more than you know." That evening, Rico sent a text, "Diner 1900, my treat." I met him and Evie at a classic American diner just outside the base in Fairfield. It was a place frozen in time, with red vinyl booths, a chrome-edged counter, and a jukebox in the corner playing old rock and roll hits. The air smelled of sizzling burgers and freshly brewed coffee. It was a world away from the cold, silent opulence of my brother's mansion. We slid into a booth, the three of us in our civilian clothes, and for an hour we were not a colonel and her sergeants. We were just Nell, Rico, and Evie. We talked about everything and nothing. Rico proudly showed us pictures of his daughter's first soccer game. Evie geeked out about a new avionics diagnostic she was developing. They asked me about my old flight instructor, and we shared stories and laughed until my sides hurt. As we nursed our chocolate milkshakes, I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the greasy, delicious burger I'd just inhaled. It was the warmth of acceptance, of belonging. Here, in this noisy, unpretentious diner, I wasn't being measured or judged. I was just seen. This was family, not the one you're born into, but the one you build, the one forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. The contrast was a physical ache. My blood family offered me judgment in a crystal glass. My chosen family offered me loyalty on a paper placemat. As we stood up to leave, Rico put a hand gently on my arm, his expression turning serious again. "Colonel," he said quietly, his voice full of a fierce, protective loyalty. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not alone in this. We've got your back." It wasn't just a promise, it was an oath. A declaration of allegiance that no amount of Sterling's money could ever buy. It was a shield, and as I walked out into the cool California night, I felt stronger and more prepared than I had in years. They had my back, and tomorrow I knew I was going to need them. The next day, the fragile peace of our diner dinner was shattered by the sound of approaching engines. But this wasn't the familiar, comforting roar of a C-17. It was the high-pitched, arrogant whine of a private jet. Sterling had arrived. From my office window, I watched his Gulfstream G650 taxi down the runway, a sleek white predator gliding among my herd of gray, utilitarian giants. It looked utterly out of place, a symbol of impatient wealth in a world defined by patient strength. The ramp lowered, and out he stepped, every inch the corporate emperor. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit and a pair of Purcell sunglasses that hid his eyes but not his smirk. Behind him trailed two assistants, young men in matching suits, clutching briefcases like loyal foot soldiers. He walked across the tarmac not like a guest, but like a new owner conducting an inspection. He gave a dismissive, regal nod to the young airman who saluted him, a gesture that barely acknowledged the man's existence. My stomach tightened. Rico, Evie, and I were waiting for him in the officers' club, a place of camaraderie and respect. Sterling swept in, his gaze raking across the room, over the polished wood bar and the squadron plaques on the wall. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply stopped in the middle of the room, peeling off his sunglasses. "Well," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the few other officers present, This is all very basic. Defense budget cuts, I presume? The insult landed like a physical blow, a subtle poison released into the air. It wasn't just directed at me. It was a blanket of contempt thrown over my entire world, over everyone in it. I felt Rico stiffen beside me. Sterling strolled to the bar and requested a Perrier with lime, then turned to face us, holding the glass like a scepter. He launched into a lecture, his voice smooth and condescending. "You have an impressive operation here, Nellie, a well-oiled machine." He took a sip. "But what's your cost per flight hour? Do you people even track KPIs? Key performance indicators?" He then had the audacity to turn his condescending gaze on my team. "You two," he said, gesturing vaguely at Rico and Evie with his glass. "You're the implementers. In my world, if you aren't generating profit, you're replaced. It's simple math." The air in the room grew thick and still. My own anger was a hot, rising tide in my chest. But before I could speak, Evie stepped forward, her back ramrod straight. "Sir," she said, her voice respectful but firm. "With all due respect, our ROI is measured in the number of lives we save. That's a difficult number to fit onto one of your spreadsheets." Sterling was visibly taken aback, his mouth tightening. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he considered a mere functionary. The silence was broken by Rico's low, steady voice. "Colonel Sharp is responsible for hundreds of human lives and billions of dollars in national assets, Mr. Vance," he said, his eyes like granite. "That's not middle management. That's command." The 1-2 punch from my team left Sterling momentarily speechless. His face flushed with anger, and he whirled on me, his true target. "You let your staff talk to me like that, Nellie?" he hissed, the word staff laced with venom. That was it. The tide of my anger crested. I remembered my father's words, a quiet echo in my mind. "Son, you can buy the world, but you can't buy integrity." I met Sterling's furious gaze, my own voice dropping to an icy calm. "They are non-commissioned officers in the United States Air Force, Sterling, and they are speaking the truth." I took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. The dynamics of the room shifted. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a confrontation. "You are on a federal military installation," I said, each word a carefully placed stone. "You are a guest, and you will conduct yourself accordingly." I was so close now, I could see the flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He was losing control, and he didn't know how to handle it. "My plane, my rules," I stated, the words leaving no room for negotiation. "You will follow every order from me and my personnel to the letter. No exceptions." I let the silence stretch, forcing him to absorb the full weight of my command. Understood? The next morning on the flight line was cold and tense. The C-17 sat waiting, a patient gray beast, its systems checked, its crew ready. My crew. They had been on time, focused, and professional. We were only waiting for one person and his entourage. They arrived 15 minutes late. They didn't hurry. They strolled across the tarmac as if they were walking through a park on a Sunday afternoon, each of them holding a large Starbucks coffee cup. There was no apology, not even a hint of awareness that they had kept an entire military flight crew waiting. Sterling, ever the showman, slapped the massive fuselage of the plane with the palm of his hand. "All right, Nellie, let's get this show on the road. Time is money, you know." I stood with my clipboard, my expression unreadable. I didn't even look up. "You're late, Sterling, and food and beverages are prohibited in the flight line's restricted area." My voice was flat, a simple statement of fact. He let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, come on, don't be so rigid, sis, it's just coffee." Then, with an air of supreme indifference, he pulled out his smartphone. He turned his back to me and held the phone up, angling for a selfie with the massive tail of the C-17 behind him. That single arrogant act lit a fuse inside me. The flight line is a dangerous, dynamic environment. Using a personal electronic device, there is not just against the rules, it's a flagrant disregard for the safety of every single person present. Rico Alvarez moved instantly. He was by Sterling's side in 3 long strides, his voice firm but controlled. "Sir, I need you to put the phone away, please. This is a restricted area." Sterling waved a dismissive hand, not even bothering to look at him, his eyes still on his phone's screen as he tried to find the perfect angle. "Just grabbing a quick pic, Sergeant. Don't get your panties in a twist." That was it. That was the last straw. All the years of insults, the mockery, the belittling of my life's work, all of it coalesced into that one moment of public, dangerous disrespect. I walked towards him, my boots making a sharp, rhythmic sound on the concrete. The wind whipped across the tarmac, but my voice cut through it, cold and clear and loud enough for the entire crew to hear. "Sterling Vance." He turned slowly, the smug, self-satisfied look still plastered on his face. "I am giving you a direct order to put away that electronic device. Now this is your final warning." He stared at me, a defiant glint in his eye. He saw his little sister, not a colonel. He saw a family dynamic to be exploited, not a commander to be obeyed. He raised his chin, a deliberate, calculated challenge in front of my people. "Or what, Nell?" he sneered. "You're gonna give your big brother an order?" In that instant, a core principle from officer training school flashed in my mind, as clear as a bolt of lightning. A commander must be willing to make the hard decisions, especially the unpopular ones. Hesitation is a luxury you cannot afford. And just like that, all hesitation vanished. The years of swallowing my anger, of keeping the peace, of being the sensitive one, it all burned away, leaving behind the cold, hard certainty of my command. I was no longer his little sister. I was Colonel Sharp. "Security," I yelled, my voice ringing with an authority that Sterling had never heard from me before. 2 uniformed security forces airmen, who had been standing by, snapped to attention and were at my side in a heartbeat. I didn't look at Sterling's shocked face. I addressed the sergeants. "This individual, Mr. Vance, has refused to comply with a direct order and has committed a serious safety violation on an active flight line." My voice was devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of command. "You will escort him and his party from the restricted area immediately. The VIP flight is canceled." A stunned silence fell over the flight line. The only sound was the wind. The faces of my crew were a mixture of shock and dawning respect. Sterling stood frozen, his jaw slack, the smirk wiped clean from his face. You wouldn't dare," he stammered, his voice a disbelieving whisper. I finally turned my eyes to him, my gaze as cold and unforgiving as polished steel. And I said the words I know many of you have dreamed of saying. To that one person who has pushed you too far, for too long. "I just did," I said. "Get out." The moment Sterling's expensive shoes were off my flight line, the storm broke. It wasn't a storm of wind and rain, but of phone calls and political pressure. My brother, accustomed to getting his way, immediately weaponized his influence. The first call was from a 2-star general at the Pentagon, a man I knew Sterling had on his list of political donations. His voice was smooth, suggesting I had perhaps overreacted and that a quiet apology would make this all go away. Then came a call from a congressman's aide, his tone more demanding, speaking of building bridges with the business community. By noon, a few sleazy online tabloids, the kind that thrive on gossip and outrage, had already published articles with headlines like "Power-tripping Colonel Ground's tycoon brother." I weathered it all with a calm I didn't entirely feel. To each caller, I repeated the same mantra, my voice a steady, unwavering line. There was a serious breach of safety protocol. A full incident report is being completed and will be sent up the proper chain of command. In the eye of the hurricane he had created, I was an island of unnerving calm. I knew I had acted correctly. I knew my career was on the line, but my integrity was not for sale. I also knew that simply defending my actions wasn't enough. A good commander doesn't just win defensive battles. They plan a counteroffensive. That afternoon, I called Evie Chen back to my office. Rico stood guard outside, ensuring we would not be disturbed. "Evie," I said, my voice low and focused, "I need you to pull the visitor access and security clearance paperwork for Sterling Vance and his entire team. Every form they filled out." "On it, Colonel," she said, her fingers already flying across her keyboard. For the next hour, we sat in silence, the only sound the quiet clicking of keys and the rustle of paper as I cross-referenced the digital files. We scanned through the mundane details, names, birth dates, social security numbers. It felt like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. My eyes were starting to blur when Evie suddenly stiffened. "Wait a minute," she whispered, leaning closer to her monitor. "Colonel, look at this." She pointed to a line item on Sterling's security application, the standard government form SF-85, the questionnaire for non-sensitive positions. It was a form required for any civilian guest needing unescorted access on base. "Section 7B, Evie read aloud. It asks, "In the last 5 years, have you traveled outside the United States?" On the screen, in the crisp digital file, was Sterling's answer. He had checked the box marked "No." Evie swiveled in her chair, a new window already open on her screen. "He checked no," she said, a grim excitement in her voice. "But I did a quick search this morning. 3 months ago, Sterling Vance was the keynote speaker at the Global Economic Forum in Dubai." She clicked, and my screen was filled with high-resolution photos from news articles. There was Sterling smiling on a stage, shaking hands with a foreign dignitary, a glittering Dubai skyline behind him. There was no ambiguity, no room for error. He hadn't just forgotten a trip. He had actively lied on a federal document, a felony. I stared at the two screens side by side, the lie and the truth. A slow, cold thrill, the kind a hunter feels when the prey steps into the crosshairs, moved through me. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a frigid, exhilarating certainty. This was it. This was the silver bullet. This was no longer a messy family drama. This wasn't about my hurt feelings or his bruised ego. This was about the law. Sterling, in his boundless arrogance, believed that the rules, the little rules that govern the rest of us, simply didn't apply to him. He thought paperwork was for little people. My father's favorite Bible verse echoed in my memory, a phrase he'd often quoted with a wry smile. "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Sterling's pride, his absolute conviction in his own untouchability, was his Achilles' heel, and I had just found the arrow. I calmly instructed Evie to print everything: the SF-85 form with the false declaration, the news articles, the high-resolution photos. I took the neat stack of papers, squared them up perfectly, and slipped them into a crisp manila folder. I looked at Evie and then at Rico, who had just stepped back inside. A silent understanding passed between the three of us. "Thank you both," I said, my voice steady. "I'll take it from here." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the folder in front of me, a single lamp casting a pool of light on the evidence. I planned my next steps with the same precision I would use to plan a flight through enemy territory. The battle wasn't over, it was just getting started, but now it would be fought on my terms, with my choice of weapon. And my weapon was the truth. A final thought surfaced, a quiet question in the stillness of the night. This was no longer self-defense. This was an attack. Was I really prepared to do this? To burn the final bridge to my own family? The question I'd asked myself in the quiet of the night, was I prepared to do this, was answered for me the next afternoon. Sterling, enraged and unable to accept being thwarted, decided to escalate. He wasn't just going to fight me through back channels with phone calls from powerful friends. He was going to try and execute me in public. He called a press conference. He didn't choose a sterile boardroom. He booked the Grand Ballroom at the Fairmont San Francisco, a historic hotel atop Nob Hill, a place that dripped with the kind of old-world luxury and power he so admired. He invited every major news outlet in the Bay Area and beyond. He was building his own stage, a gilded scaffold from which he intended to publicly hang my career, all while casting himself as the victim and me as the unhinged villain. I knew every detail because his PR team made sure I got the press release. They wanted me to be paralyzed, to sit in my office and watch my own destruction on a live feed. They underestimated me. I watched the feed from a laptop in a waiting town car just a block away from the hotel. I saw him take the stage, standing at a podium backed by a dozen perfectly placed American flags, a carefully crafted image of patriotism. He looked somber, his brows furrowed in feigned concern, his voice filled with a fake, resonant sympathy as he spoke into the forest of microphones. "It is with a heavy heart that I stand before you today," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "My sister, Colonel Nellie Sharp, is a decorated officer, a woman I deeply admire." He paused, letting the lie settle in the air, a poisonous perfume. "But recently she has abused her considerable power, seemingly due to a minor family disagreement that should have remained private." He shook his head sadly, a masterful performance of a grieving brother. "I am not here today out of anger, but out of concern, a deep and profound concern for her judgment, as she commands critical national assets, a concern that her personal feelings may be clouding her professional duties. He was brilliant, he was poisonous, he was trying to destroy my career, my reputation, my entire life, all while wrapping himself in the flag of loving, worried brother. He was painting me as an unstable, emotional woman. A classic, ugly tactic used to discredit women in power since the beginning of time. He was about to open the floor to questions, to let his carefully constructed narrative cement itself in the public mind when the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. And I walked in. A hush fell over the room, sudden and absolute. The scrum of reporters who had been leaning forward, pens poised and recorders on, now turned as one. The rhythmic, chaotic clicking of cameras was replaced by a sudden, sharp intake of collective breath. Every lens, every eye, every bit of attention in that cavernous, ornate room swiveled from him to me. I saw Sterling's face on the large monitors flanking the stage. I watched his jaw go slack. The confident, healthy tan seemed to drain from his cheeks, leaving him a pasty, sickly white. The concerned patriarch, the captain of industry, vanished. In his place was a man staring at a ghost. I was in my full-service dress uniform. The dark blue jacket, perfectly pressed, the silver insignia gleaming on my shoulders, my commendation ribbons a neat, solid block of color over my heart. I was not Nellie Sharp, the little sister. I was Colonel Sharp of the United States Air Force, and I was no longer on the defensive. I walked down the center aisle with a steady, unhurried pace, my shoes making no sound on the thick, plush carpet. I walked past the rows of stunned reporters, my gaze fixed forward, and ascended the few steps to the stage. I didn't look at my brother. I didn't acknowledge his presence. I walked directly to the podium, standing beside him as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture. I leaned into the microphones. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice calm, clear, and amplified throughout the silent, gilded room. "My name is Colonel Nellie Sharp. I am here to provide the full and necessary context for yesterday's events at Travis Air Force Base." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue or accuse. I simply took control of his stage, his narrative, and his audience. The VIP flight for Mr. Sterling Vance was indeed canceled by my authority. I continued, my eyes scanning the faces of the journalists, meeting their gazes one by one. It was canceled for a significant and non-negotiable security reason. I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in, creating a vacuum that I was about to fill with the truth. Specifically, Mr. Vance falsified information on his official government security clearance application, the Standard Form 85. For those of you who are not aware, knowingly providing false information on such a document is a federal offense. A ripple of murmurs, of frantic whispers went through the room. I saw reporters start typing furiously on their laptops, the sound like a sudden downpour. I gave a slight nod towards the side of the stage. On cue, Staff Sergeant Evie Chen, also in impeccable uniform, stepped forward from the wings and, with a few keystrokes on a laptop, brought the evidence to life. On the two large screens that had previously shown Sterling's concerned face, a new image appeared. It was a high-resolution scan of his SF-85 form, and on it, in Section 7B, the box next to the question about foreign travel was clearly, undeniably checked. No. Then the image on the screen split. Beside the damning form appeared a photograph from a well-known business publication. Sterling, smiling broadly, shaking hands on a stage in Dubai just 3 months prior, the iconic Burj Al Arab in the background. A collective gasp, sharp and audible, went through the ballroom. It was irrefutable. It was absolute. It was the end. National security is not a casual matter, I concluded, my voice as sharp and clean as a blade. And the truth is not an optional extra for those who believe they are above the rules. I acted in accordance with the law and my sworn oath to protect the assets and personnel under my command. I looked out at the sea of stunned faces, then turned my head slightly, finally allowing myself to look at my brother. He was frozen, a statue of ruin, his empire of lies collapsing around him in the bright, unforgiving glare of the television lights. "Are there any questions?" I asked the room. There was no champagne pop, no victory lap. After the press conference, I felt a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. It wasn't the satisfying tiredness after a long flight. It was the hollow ache that comes after a battle, even a victorious one. The adrenaline drained away, leaving a quiet, empty space in its wake. I had won, but the cost was the final, irrevocable severing of a tie to my own family. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. News channels played the clip of my presentation on a loop. Vance Global's stock plummeted. The Department of Justice announced a formal investigation into Sterling for making false statements on a federal document. The empire he had built on arrogance and intimidation was beginning to crumble. That evening, as I sat in my quiet apartment off base, an email from him arrived. My hands were steady as I opened it. It was a long, rambling message, a masterpiece of manipulative self-pity. It began with the words, "I'm sorry." But the sentiment didn't last. The next paragraph shifted the blame entirely onto me. "I'm sorry that you felt the need to push things this far," he wrote. "This was a private matter that we could have handled quietly. By making this a public spectacle, you have destroyed this family. You have ruined everything." I read the words, and for the first time, they didn't hurt. The familiar sting of his disapproval, the ache of his rejection, it was gone. All I felt was a distant, clinical pity. He still didn't get it. He never would. He saw family as a shield to hide behind, not a bond to be honored. He saw my actions as an attack on him, not a defense of my own integrity and the honor of our father. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I simply created a new folder in my email client, named it Evidence, and dragged his message into it. Then I closed my laptop. A boundary had been drawn, not in anger, but in a calm, final clarity. In my living room, on a small, polished wooden shelf, sits the American flag from my father's funeral, folded into its tight, perfect triangle. I walked over and ran my fingers over the crisp linen, the embroidered stars hard beneath my touch. This was his legacy. Not the bottom line Sterling spoke of, but a quiet, unwavering commitment to honor and truth. I had defended it, and in doing so, I had finally, truly claimed it as my own. My victory felt incomplete, however, as long as I was still holding on to the ghosts of the past. I went to my desk and pulled out an old, worn journal. Tucked inside was the letter I had written to Sterling all those years ago from a dusty tent in post-Katrina New Orleans. The unsent email I had transcribed onto paper, a desperate plea for understanding from a younger, more vulnerable version of myself. I read it again, the words smudged in places where tears had once fallen. I saw the young woman who had written it, the one who still craved her brother's approval, who believed that if she could just explain her world to him, he might finally see her. I felt a wave of compassion for her, for the pain she had carried for so long. But I wasn't her anymore. I didn't need his validation. I had my own. I took the letter, a small metal wastebasket, and a lighter out onto my small balcony. The cool California night air washed over me. Under the vast, starry sky, I set the corner of the paper alight. The flame caught quickly, a bright orange tongue licking at the ink. I watched as the words curled into black ash, the sentences full of pain and pleading, turning into smoke and drifting away into the darkness. I was releasing the ghost. I was setting myself free. With the past finally behind me, I felt a sudden urge to reach for the future. I picked up my phone and did something I had never dared to do before. I opened Instagram and found my niece Tori's profile. I thought about the scandal, about the angry defensive messages she might send. But that was Sterling's cycle of blame and anger. I was choosing to start a new one. I walked over to my window. My combat boots, still caked with the dust of the Travis flight line, were sitting on the floor. I picked them up and placed them on the windowsill. Outside, the sky was ablaze with the deep purples and fiery oranges of a California sunset. I snapped a picture, the rugged, worn boots in the foreground, the beautiful, peaceful sky behind them. I sent the photo to Tori as a direct message. I didn't mention her father. I didn't mention the press conference. I just added a short, simple caption. "This is the view from my office. Love you." It wasn't a boast. It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. It was a quiet, hopeful attempt to break the cycle of contempt, to show the next generation that there was another way to be strong, another kind of legacy worth fighting for. I had no idea if she would answer, but for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I had cleared my own runway. Several months passed. The storm of the press conference subsided, leaving behind the quiet wreckage of Sterling's public image. He was entangled in legal battles, his name now a cautionary tale in the business world. I followed the news from a distance, but it no longer felt like my fight. I had won the only victory that mattered, the one for my own peace. Today I was flying again, but not in the cockpit of a C-17. I was sitting in seat 12A on a commercial United Airlines flight from San Francisco to Hartford, Connecticut. I was going to see my mother, but this time it was on my terms. There were no demands, no expectations, no desperate need for her approval. I was just a daughter going to see her mother. Dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, I felt blissfully anonymous. I was just another face in the crowd, another passenger finding their seat, and for the first time in years that felt like freedom. The constant low-grade pressure to prove my worth, to justify my existence, was gone. As I handed my boarding pass to the flight attendant at the gate, she glanced down at it, then up at me. Her professional smile warmed into something genuine. "Welcome aboard, Colonel Sharp," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Thank you for your service." Her words, so simple and sincere, coming from a complete stranger, struck a chord deep inside me. They held more weight, more meaning than all the grudging, backhanded compliments I had ever received from my own family. I smiled back, a real unburdened smile. "Thank you," I said. "It's my honor." As the plane climbed through the clouds, breaking into the brilliant, unending sunshine above the gray marine layer of the Bay Area, I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The world below, with its complications and its noise, seemed to shrink away. Up here, there was only the vast open sky. The captain turned off the seatbelt sign, and a chorus of clicks echoed through the cabin. I pulled out my phone, not expecting anything, just scrolling through old messages. And then it vibrated with a new one. My heart gave a little lurch. It was a notification from Instagram, from Tori. My thumb hovered over the icon, a moment of hesitation, a flicker of the old vulnerability. I took a breath and opened the message. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation or a defense of her father. It was a picture. A screenshot of the photo I had sent her months ago, my dusty combat boots on the windowsill against the sunset. And below it was a simple, 7-word question. "Those boots are so cool, Auntie. Where's your next flight to?" I stared at the words, reading them over and over. A question, a simple, genuine question. It wasn't about money or power or status. It was about my life, my world. It was a flicker of curiosity, a glimmer of respect. It was the beginning of a bridge being built across a canyon of contempt I thought was impassable. The cycle of disregard, the one that had defined my life for so long, had been broken by a single hopeful question. A wave of emotion, warm and overwhelming, washed over me, and for the first time in a very long time, my eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but of a quiet, profound gratitude. I looked out the window again, at the endless sea of white clouds stretching to the horizon. It looked like a fresh start, like a clean blank page. A genuine, unforced smile spread across my face. I no longer needed Sterling's approval or my mother's defense. My worth wasn't up for their debate. It was forged in the cockpit of my plane, in the trust of my crew, in the strength of my own spine. I had fought the most important battle of my life, the one for my own soul, and I had won. Not with guns or bombs, but with truth and honor. The legacy my father had left me wasn't property or stock. It was a compass, and it had finally guided me home to myself. A quiet thought settled in my mind, as clear and peaceful as the blue sky outside my window. For so many years I had let my brother tell my story, casting me as a minor character in his grand narrative. Today I finally flew it myself. My journey was far from over, but the flight plan was now my own. And ahead of me, there was nothing but open sky. This is Colonel Nellie Sharp, and my story has come to an end. But I know for so many of you, your own story continues. You might be facing your own battles, your own family dynamics, or your own fight for respect. My question to you is, what does your open sky look like? What is the one boundary you need to set, or the one truth you need to speak, to start flying your own story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your journey matters. And if my story resonated with you, please subscribe to Chosen Revenge for more stories of strength, resilience, and self-made dawns. You are not alone.